we'll quickly move on to our keynote address by Dr. Ajay Mathur, in which he will show us how energy efficiency and renewable energy can be a winning triple sector strategy for decarbonizing India. In his previous avatars, Dr. Mathur headed the Energy and Resources Institute, TERI, and the Bureau of Energy Efficiency. He was a leading climate change negotiator and was the Indian spokesperson at the Paris climate negotiations. He served as the interim director of the Green Climate Fund during its foundational period. He was also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Climate Change and co-chairs the Global Energy Transitions Commission. Welcome, Dr. Mathur.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, first of all, it's a huge pleasure to be back here amongst all of you, amongst the energy efficiency community. And I want to thank Satish for this opportunity, as well as thank Chirag and the Executive Council of AEEE for making this possible. Colleagues, at the Forum on Energy Efficiency and Decarbonization, we are looking at how we can move these two together, integrate them. We are in the nation, in fact, I would say at the globe, at a point, I wouldn't say a point, but possibly a stretch in which we are looking at decarbonizing our economies. India, of course, has said we will decarbonize, go net zero by 2070, but the point remains that we are looking at decarbonization. And hence, I will argue that the integration of energy efficiency into decarbonization is the way ahead. Just as it is being considered here, just as the recent amendment to the Energy Conservation Act enabled. You know, if you look back at the last 15 or 20 years, as the energy efficiency community, we have been successful in stimulating household appliance efficiency, industrial energy efficiency, at least in the energy-intensive industries, and to a lesser extent also in the design and construction of new buildings, particularly those that are used by the builders themselves, not the developer-owned, but the builder-built buildings. As a result of all of this, I think I can safely say that there are three things that we have learned as far as energy efficiency is concerned. The first is that the ability to see the difference between an energy efficient product and a non-energy efficient product makes a huge difference. So whether it is the label, whether it is the unique looking LED bulb, they capture people's imagination. You know, when I was with the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, we had many meetings. I think at that point of time, we had 6 meetings of the Parliamentary Committee on Energy. And at the end of the 6th meeting, a member of Parliament asked me, you know, I know LEDs are energy efficiency. What else is energy efficiency? I was obviously horrified. But what it told me is that the ability to see the difference matters. Clearly, this is a challenge that renewable energy products don't have. For example, the omnipresent solar panels show that they're different, that they are about tomorrow, not about yesterday. The second thing that we have learned as a community is that for industrial users, clarity in terms of benefits due to energy efficiency investments matters. Whether it is in terms of returns or payback period or becoming more competitive or capturing more of the market, we need to meet that demand. So I will, though, say that while this is so, it took a change to the law and regulations in terms of the PAT regulations for energy efficiency in large industry to move from the boiler room to the boardroom. And the third thing that we as a community have, in a sense, found is that, especially in large industry, but also in commercial builds, in some MSMEs, and to a limited extent in households as well, sometimes ESCOs work. So, in many cases, payments linked to continued energy savings do make a difference, though I will say that in many cases, we have not been able to grow energy service companies. So, the challenge is, how do we build on these three learnings as we move towards decarbonization? As I said earlier, there are many, many, many applications where these three learnings do not apply. So for developer-built buildings as opposed to builder-built buildings, for the agriculture sector, for energy efficiency in most MSMEs, for fuel substitution reasons, we are not able to puncture, we are not able to get into the market for energy efficiency easily. So, clearly, as far as high capital outlay is needed, either we have mind-numbing clarity or we have mindless clarity. Then it works. We need to find a middle path. And as we move towards the national goal of net zero by 2070, we see that as driving investments. And Rajat, I'm sure you'll talk much more about that. So whether it is processes and equipment with longer lives, but also we are seeing a movement in shorter life-based investments, including consumer appliances, where decarbonization is starting to play a role. It is clear that when investments are based only on renewable energy, they can be costly. Possibly sometimes not even cost-effective in the 3-year payback period range that we talk about. Consequently, they need to build in energy efficiency as well. It is this linkage of energy efficiency and decarbonization that I think makes sense for all of us. I would therefore note that there are two things that we need to move. The first is applications. Applications that integrate decarbonization and energy efficiency. I will say that this is not as easy as it sounds, but more of that in a moment. And the second is, whether it is renewables or energy efficiency, we need front-loaded, project-based financing and the business models that go with it to make a value proposition for homes, for offices, and for businesses that is both viable and sellable. We may well say that this is inevitable. It is the dynamics of tomorrow's markets. But this group has the opportunity to become the first movers in the market of tomorrow. Let's delve into this a little bit. As far as applications that enable decarbonization and energy efficiency are concerned, they obviously include the things that today form the vast bulk of energy efficiency applications, because they reduce the energy used. Most of the energy that is supplied is fossil fuel based and consequently results in decarbonization. So whether we are talking of an energy efficient air conditioner or more energy efficient buildings or more efficient industrial processes, these lead to decarbonization and hence should continue to grow faster than they have been growing. Similarly, there are technologies that combine energy efficiency with renewable energy. Solar pumps, net zero buildings are some examples. They are there, but they need to grow. They also enable decarbonization as well as energy efficiency and consequently will be part of this solution. It is the third group that I especially want to focus on. This is growing in relevance and importance. This specifically links energy efficiency with renewable energy and with storage. I talk of standalone electric cookers or standalone charging stations for electric vehicles or standalone electrolyzers, water electrolyzers for green hydrogen production. All of them gain, both in terms of price and in technical competitiveness, from energy efficiency increases. They also gain from decarbonization because of the renewable energy that they use. However, all of these are possible with the use of renewable energy, and the most common forms of renewable energy that we know, wind and solar, these are available intermittently. But the use of these applications occurs beyond the hours of renewable energy supply. Hence, storage becomes important. Consequently, incorporating storage together with renewables and energy efficiency, to me, becomes important. By the way, this is not new. Solar home lights, solar street lights are some of the examples that we have seen for a long time. I would suggest we need to increase the repertoire of products and services in this area. With these applications, whether of energy efficiency alone or energy efficiency plus renewables or energy efficiency plus renewables plus storage, any of those, the key is business models. We have seen that the high transactions costs of verifications have limited the growth of the ESCO market in India. However, we see that a commercial RESCO market, renewable energy supply company market, is thriving. There are at least 7 or 8 or 10 companies who make a living out of saying that we will pay for putting up a renewable energy system on your roof, and you pay us for the electricity that we supply. I think what it tells us is that the mechanisms of verification need to be weighed against the benefits of energy efficiency or energy supply. Clearly, users seek to ensure that they keep the upside of energy savings. ESCOs need to protect themselves against the downsides of uncertainty and of verifiability. As a result, what energy efficiency and renewables together do is that they enhance either the energy saved or the energy supplied. You see the solar energy panels there. All of this leads to a case where round-the-clock energy service companies may become viable. I wait for an answer from all of you. To end, I'd like to focus on 3 public policy issues which together we need to influence in order to accelerate the market for energy efficiency and decarbonization together, and to facilitate front-loaded project-based financing. So these are the 2 things I believe that are essential as we move ahead. Applications on the one hand and front-loaded project-based financing on the other. So the first goal of these 3 public policy issues The first and most important goal, I believe, is enabling cheaper financing. We need to argue, I believe, for blended financing that brings together local debt capital, but mixes it with bilateral debt capital. Bilateral is from other countries, other development banks, with national and international private sector equity capital. All of this blended to bring down the cost of capital. Now, obviously, investors would need confidence, and consequently, mechanisms that enable this confidence through guarantees is, I think, the need of the hour. These guarantees could be provided by the developed countries, they could be provided by MDBs, but we need to have a framework within which, for decarbonization, we have these guarantees in place. I would point out that there's at least one company, the Solar Energy Corporation of India, which is a guarantee-based market-creating company. Could we ask for something similar? This would obviously require linkage of the impacts of that company to CO2 emissions. This is both difficult, but I would suggest easier in terms of verification. This leads me to the conclusion that energy efficiency and renewable energy can be made into bedfellows. Clearly, it's easier to verify renewable energy component, the green component, than the energy efficiency component. I would argue that energy efficiency components make the renewable energy component more cost-effective. I would urge each one of you to fight, to argue for these financial instruments. India is today the president of the G20, and there are many G20 fora on which we can and should argue for these. The energy efficiency discussions in the G20 provide us an opportunity to do so. For many of us, to create financial structures and models that bring this together would be important, and it would be invaluable in starting talking in many, many fora about how we can apply them to the various applications and the various ways in which front-loaded financing can be brought into this sector. So as I said, the first public policy goal has to be to enable cheaper finance. The second has to be to help business model development. This is crucial. It is crucial on how we make this happen. Now, many of you are already used to providing programs in which payments are linked to continued energy savings. It would be useful to start testing the waters for models that link payments to continued decarbonization, and ensuring that payments are less than the investments that have been made in the energy efficiency, or the energy efficiency plus renewables, or the energy efficiency plus renewables plus storage applications. It also forces us to think out of the box. Today we think of cold storages as a mechanism in which we provide the cold storage and the electricity is provided by a diesel. If you look at renewables alone, well, I can put a solar panel, but what happens at night? Now, the first answer I will give is maybe put a battery. But if you start thinking about it, possibly chilling water might be a good example. You chill water during the day with the solar electricity, and that chilled water is used to provide the cold storage cooled during the night. All of these would require contracts for services. And building standard contracts and standard mechanisms for verification would help in moving these forwards. I will again argue that having standard verification mechanisms for CO2 emissions, and hence the fossil fuel used help us greatly. It might be useful to argue for a standard energy service agreement just as we have for the electricity supply. Today we buy electricity from distribution companies on the basis of a standard agreement. Yes, of course, this has meant that electricity supply has become a regulated market. So we need to figure out how we can enable these standard agreements without making the market regulated. And the third and final goal that I'd leave with you is that we need to promote the development of new applications. I talked about building together energy efficiency with renewables and with storage. We need to build them. So many of you have already existing relationships, I see many people here, with renewable energy suppliers. And use your supply chains to incorporate renewable energy sources and batteries into your products that you sell. I would urge a larger number of you to do that. And therefore work on renewable energy plus energy efficiency plus storage applications. In many cases, this would need the development of new products. And I gave some examples earlier. We would need R&D support for this. This is possible through R&D cost sharing. We need to fight for it. It is possible through expanding the areas for which the PLI program, the Product Linked Incentive Program, is used to finance new products across the valley of death. Right now, we have seen it happen in the solar components area. We have seen it happen in the battery area. I think we need to fight for it to occur in the larger decarbonization area. And it is possibly easier because we will have large supporters, influential supporters, when you talk about decarbonization and the fact that it matches the goals that the country has for itself. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that achieving decarbonization and energy efficiency together is clearly a challenge. But I also hope, and I hope that you will agree with me, that together we can do it. Thank you very, very much.
We have time for a few questions from the audience. We do want to make the most of having Dr. Mathur amongst us.
Let me have the honor of the first question. Thank you, first of all, very much. It's indeed important for me to have picked up what you talked about, application and business models. So when I'm speaking with some of the financing institutions, there is a concept that was being brought forward, and it's been talked about, called the ESG financing. And the financing for environment in that specifically found favor of only about 10 basis points at best in its cost of capital. The second piece that we at AEEE also have been talking about is the business model enablement. And there is a conversation which is not new again, which has been going on for many years, around how do we look at energy services company or anything that we can do, much like what you gave as an example of 7, 8 organizations making a living out of getting a revenue from the renewable energy, but the capital cost being with them. Now, many private enterprises are not banks, as you understand. They will rely on financing. The cost of capital, hence, is the first part of what I shared with you becomes important. Second part is the contractual enforcement. And I wanted your thoughts, since you've had extensive experience in doing this. Any suggestions that you can lend to us, either in the hat of AEEE or for private players, that how is it that we are able to crack these two elements? Because these are the two which, energy is a regulated subject in the country, basis the law of the land. And then we are still trying to figure out, one, the cost, and second is the enforcement of a contract in the regulated market. But we have the technology. So imagine that we have the technology, but we are not able to go and put it on the ground, and hence do what we are talking here as bringing energy efficiency and help decarbonize with that. So, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chirag. You know, I think you've hit the nail on the head as far as these two issues are concerned. We need capital which is far cheaper than the 10 basis points that you spoke about. Now the fact remains that why is it that capital is at, the difference between capital availability in the developed and developing countries is at least 10 percentage points. So clearly foreign currency depreciation or national currency depreciation against the foreign currency is one of the key factors. The other is, and we had discussions with about 100 investors in the past year about why they were not investing, not in India, but in Africa. In 2021, something like $200 billion were invested in the solar industry globally, but only 5% of it went to Africa. So we asked why. And the answer that we got was that they were very uncomfortable about whether they will get their repayment or not. So, to me, there are therefore two parts to this. The first is that create the blended capital instruments. So, as more and more organizations start creating these blended capital instruments, which blend together, obviously national debt at 10 or 11%, together with international debt at 2%, and the international capital equity market, which will come in at 3% on a dollar basis. Then you have foreign currency risk hedging. This is a market which only is available for sales. It's not available for long-term periods. So that's this. And then you have guarantees for performance for payments. It is creating these risk mechanisms that is most important. And I will argue that we need to use the G20 forum in this year and beyond. This is not going to happen in 1 year, but we need to create these markets. Why will the developed countries come in? They will come in because of the decarbonization opportunities. This is where energy efficiency and decarbonization comes together. The fact that we will be able to get front-loaded finance at cheaper rates is completely dependent on the fact that we are able to promise CO2 emissions reductions. On the issue of contractual agreements, Chirag, this is something that has bothered me for many, many years. Satish has been a prime votary of making this happen, and we tried many, many things. But what I now realize is that the overall energy savings that occur are relatively small compared to the hassle of verification. So there are two parts. One is the hassle of verification, the other is the cost of verification. Can we reduce the hassle of verification? It is my view at this moment of time, and all of you will need to tell me whether this is correct or not. It is my opinion right now that the hassle can be reduced by going towards the CO2 emissions as the verification goal. So as in the perform, achieve and trade, we went to a single thing, how much energy used. So similarly, we moved towards an fossil fuel energy input basis. That alone becomes the basis of verification. That could be a way in which the transaction costs are reduced. But as you will understand, this is an idea. I have no idea whether it will work out in real life or not. That, as I said, I'm waiting for your answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And before we just move on to the next few questions, as we move into after your session and the fireside chat, there are two thoughts, and maybe Rajat, I'm just kind of priming you up for that. is one of them how technology will play the role in future from your eyes or Rajat's or somebody else. And at the same time, there is enough money in the value chain, as I said in my opening remarks, that can be saved and feed multiple participants or constituents in the value chain. I have someplace stopped looking for cheaper financing personally. I believe that there is enough money in the value chain which is getting wasted. We just need to find a way to extract it.
Okay, I hope that you're right. It is the size of the savings through which we are asking multiple people to share the profits. And if the size is size per transaction and all the transactions together, if the pie is large enough, then it is possible. And all power for that.
Hello. Hi, Dr.
Hi.
Mathur.
How are
Prasad
you?
Vaidya. Yeah, I'm leading Solar Decathlon India. I have a question for you. It's difficult. I hope I can articulate it properly. So we are all here believers and advocates of energy efficiency. But when we step out, there are questions. One of the questions that often comes up in the field of energy efficiency is the issue of rebound effect. And that is directly tied to energy efficiency plus decarbonization, because if you get the rebound effect where you save in one place and you end up spending in another place, and that's not the decarbonized area, then you don't get decarbonization eventually, right? So we've seen this, that in California they were able to flatten the per capita consumption over a long period of time, and that seems to have worked with energy efficiency as well as decarbonization. But in a country like India, where we are growing and people's aspirations are also growing to consume in different ways, how do we tackle this issue of rebound effect?
I don't have an answer. It's as simple as that, because the rebound effect, you said it, California, it is possible. In India, where the growth is still occurring, how much of the reduction, is there a reduction in growth from the business as usual? Okay, possibly you can argue that. How much of it is due to energy efficiency? How much is the rebound effect? It's anybody's guess. My own view is that good economic modeling is essential. All the economic modeling on the rebound effect that has happened on static economies. We have not seen it in the context of dynamic growing economies. So, first of all, I am not very sure whether the Jevons paradox of savings applies in the context of decarbonization. It certainly applies in the case of the total amount of money you have in your pocket. If you save it here, you spend it somewhere else. But whether it applies for decarbonization, I don't know. So what I'm hoping is that decarbonization provides us an opportunity. Because on decarbonization, you have a goal. You have a goal of net zero by 2070. That hopefully provides us a path to answer the question. But whether it is a analytically based answer, that will depend on whether we can get good economic models out of this.
Hello, thanks. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, I think we need to move on with the program. But should you have any other sort of pressing questions, I would request you to please take it up with Dr. Mathur offline. May I request Mr. Baijal to kindly come up on stage and present our token of thanks to Dr. Ajay Mathur for his keynote address. Thank you, Dr. Mathur, for showing us how energy efficiency and renewable energy are so inextricably linked to each other, and how innovative business models is the beating heart of this linkage.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mathur. Thank you, Mr. Baijal.